All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our district administration web seminar here today, which is entitled Helping Your Teachers Understand Dyslexia in the Elementary Classroom, which is brought to you by the general support of our sponsor that we have with us today, iStation. Now, before we get started, I would just like to share just a few housekeeping items, and we'll get right to the presentation shortly. If at any time you need any technical support today, just please use the chat panel, which you can find us on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Then all I have to do is just select my name, which is Stephen Blackburn, or host, and then just type in your message, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. I'm also about to submit a phone number and access code in the chat that you can dial in if you want to listen in privately or if you don't have any speakers. So look out for that as well. We will also be welcoming any questions that you have here today with a Q&A session, and that will be happening at the end of the presentation. You can submit a question at any time from now until the end just by using the Q&A panel, which, like the chat panel, you can find us on the bottom right-hand side of your screen, and then just send in your questions to all panelists so we can answer them. If you currently don't see the chat or the Q&A panels, just again, look to the bottom right-hand side of your screen and then click on the expand triangle. Also, the last point I'd like to make is that if you would like to access this web seminar at a later time, you'll be pleased to know that all of you here, as well as everyone who registered, all of you will receive an email with a link to the slides as well as an archive recording from us at DA. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers that we have with us today. We have Dr. Victoria Locke, who is the Vice President of Research and Assessment over at iStation. And also here with us is Jenny Paris, who is a professional learning consultant also at iStation. Well, welcome both of you for being with us here today. The floor, as they say, it is all yours.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so hopefully everybody can see the agenda for today. This is our learning outcomes. This is where we're headed in our web seminar this afternoon. What research says about dyslexia, what dyslexia is not. So we'll talk about some myths about iStation, and then how can we continue to support educators who are supporting students that are at risk in the classroom. So before we kick off and get started, we want to find out who our audience is. So we have a quick poll on what is your current role? All right, time is up. Let's go ahead and share out those results. It says that we've got some district personnel, some school personnel. We've got a few classroom personnel as well as others. So thank you for sharing with us where you are from. You can certainly put that in chat too to let us know maybe what state you're coming from. We'd love to know what area you are calling in from. So thank you for answering our poll. And I am now going to turn it over to our fabulous Dr. Locke.
Oh, you're currently muted.
You're muted. Sorry, Dr.
I
Locke.
saw that. That is it. Thank you, everyone, so much for taking time out of your very busy schedules to learn more about dyslexia. Dyslexia is becoming, it's been a very hot topic in the past few years. Several states have passed legislation with screening requirements. And there's good reasons for the focus on dyslexia, because research is coming out that shows that students that are identified earlier have a better opportunity to learn some different ways of learning to read that can mediate the risk of having dyslexia. So let's just start out and find out more about what dyslexia is. It's a reading disability that's neurobiological in origin. That means it's in the brain. There's fMRI studies that show that there's different brain activity during reading between people with dyslexia and people who do not have dyslexia. It does occur in all languages. It's in Japanese, in Chinese, in Hungarian, and in English, Spanish. And it occurs in all writing systems as well. But some of the core dysfunctions are in phonemic awareness and also the decoding abilities. And so phonemic awareness is the ability to hear all of the different sounds that are in a word. So say the word phonemic, for example, it's the ability to hear the O, all of the different sounds that are in the words. So that's what dyslexia is. Prevalency rates differ between different languages. It's more common in languages such as English, which are more difficult to learn how to read in because it's less phonetic. It's less common in languages such as Spanish and Italian that are more phonetic. Next slide, please. Okay, so how does the brain look different in people with and without dyslexia? So on the left side of the screen, you'll see the brain of a reader without dyslexia. So in the front of the brain with the articulation and word analysis, there is some activity there, but there's more activity in other areas of the brain closer to the ear for phonemic awareness, and also integration between the words and how they look. The brain on the right shows the brain activity of a reader with dyslexia, and so that reader has overactivated in the articulation and word analysis part of the brain because the other parts of the brain are underactivated. A lot of dyslexia screeners include a rapid naming assessment. And rapid naming is just the ability to quickly identify, call out the names of objects or letters or numbers. Rapid naming is thought just to capture that very complex process that goes on within the brain whenever we're engaging in any kind of literacy activities. And so this is why RAN is sensitive as a risk factor for dyslexia. Although the research shows that intervention in RAN, so if you have a child that is not doing as well with RAN and you intervene for it, that does not necessarily help their reading. So it's more of a red flag that goes on. So what does it look like in the elementary school classroom? So in the preschool years, these children will have trouble with rhyming. They'll have trouble with Jack and Jill go up the hill. They won't be able to recognize the rhyming patterns. They have difficulties learning the alphabet. And this is the time when teachers start teaching them how to write their names, and they have trouble with writing their name, or they might misspell their name. Also, if they have a sibling or a parent with dyslexia, that is also a red flag because it is heritable. There is some research that has identified some chromosomes that indicate a higher risk for dyslexia. So that's another red flag. What does it look like in the kindergarten and first grade classroom? This is when their trouble with phonemic awareness becomes more visible and they have difficulty recognizing the sounds. And it's also associated with that is they continue to struggle with the alphabet knowledge, remembering the letters, remembering which sounds go with which letters, which combinations of sounds go together. And they'll get their sounds and letters mixed up, especially if they look similar, such as P, B, and D. And in phonics, this is where they're struggling with even simple words such as dog or jam or bed that just have a few sounds going together to combine the word. These students, they will avoid reading tasks. They will let anybody else read besides them, or they complain that reading is hard and they don't want to do it. And when they do read, they have an over-reliance on picture cues. They might say, you know, puppy instead of dog because it looks like a puppy on the page. Or if they have that they say kitty instead of cat and there's a picture of a cat. So that's another red flag. Another red flag is if they're referred for retention, especially in kindergarten. And sometimes the teachers will want to refer them for retention because they think, well, the student just needs more time. And so that can be indicated by some of their strengths. So some of the strengths that these students will have, especially in their early vocabulary, will be as good as or better than typically developing readers. They develop some of these strengths in order to mediate what's going on. They tend to have very good listening comprehension skills. They might have very good visual spatial skills. And so a teacher might look at these students and say, well, gosh, you know, they've got a really good vocabulary and they listen well, but they're struggling with reading. Maybe they just need more time. And actually the research shows that's the worst intervention that we can do for these students without changing how reading is taught to them. Next slide. So these are some graphs that illustrate some of the strengths and weaknesses of students with dyslexia. And this came from data that we have on our iStations indicator of progress reading assessment, which is an approved dyslexia screener in several states. So we assess some of the subtests are phonemic awareness, listening comprehension, and others that you can see here on the slide. The data for these slides came from a cohort of third grade students in 2018 and 19 who had been using iStation since kindergarten. So on the graphs on the right, you'll see on the x-axis where you'll have K fall, K winter, and K spring. These are those students' ISIP scores from the fall, winter, and spring of kindergarten. The one indicates first grade, two indicates second grade, and so on. So on the phonemic awareness, you can see when they enter the kindergarten door in the fall, the students with dyslexia do more poorly on phonemic awareness tasks. They will have growth in this area, but they're never able to catch up to the typically developing reader. And the same thing for letter knowledge, which is the graph right below phonemic awareness. Over to the right, we see more of the strengths in listening comprehension, where they look very similar to a typically developing reader. And then in vocabulary, the x-axis goes all the way to the spring of third grade. And you can see we're in kindergarten. They start off very similarly to a typically developing reader. But as the course of their academic career goes on and the other students are reading to learn and the students at risk of dyslexia are still learning to read, their strengths in vocabulary begin to erode. These are some graphs of a student at risk of dyslexia in kindergarten. And this is a classic profile of a student that is at risk. In the iStations indicators of progress, we have 5 different levels. And they're similar to the tiers that you might be more familiar with. Level 1 are students that are at the 20th percentile or below. Level 2 is the 20th to 40th percentile. Level 3 is 40 to 60. And so they're based on fourth level is 60 to 80, and the 5th level is 80 and above. So this student, their overall reading score, which is a combination of all the subtests that they take, is their overall reading score is in the green. So this is a level 3 student. And then in vocabulary, you can also see those strengths, and as well as listening comprehension. But where they're struggling more is in phonemic awareness and letter knowledge. So overall, the ISIP scores are in level 3 and 4, and this is a child that might fly under the radar because their vocabulary and listening comprehension skills are bringing up that overall score, but they're showing some red flags in phonemic awareness and letter knowledge. So beyond the kindergarten, these are some graphs again for skills in reading comprehension, text fluency, spelling, and also alphabetic decoding, which is a nonsense word fluency subtest. So the difficulties in those early building blocks then translate into difficulties in reading comprehension and the other higher order reading skills. So that's what dyslexia is, and that's what it looks like in the classroom. And so some of the myths about dyslexia. So one myth is that, people with dyslexia just see, letters backwards, and this is a common myth. And that's not necessarily the case. Often what's going on is they might confuse which sounds go with which letters, and reversals are more difficult. Reversals are common in young readers, especially in pre-kindergarten and kindergarten students, but if they persist into first and second grade, then that's a warning sign. I've briefly discussed this before, that maybe they just need more time. Actually, what they do need is specialized instruction. There are some instructional interventions that can be given to these students. And the research shows that there is a certain window of time where the specialized instructions can make a difference and mediate the risk. And if we wait too late, if we wait until third grade to give them that specialized instruction, then that window of opportunity has really started to close, and those instructional strategies won't work as well with older children. Another myth is if they would only try harder, they could learn how to read. And again, that's also not necessarily the case. Their brains are wired differently. They need special instruction. They're working really hard, but it's hard for them. Another myth is that dyslexia goes away. And again, that's not the case. They can learn to read. They can learn to read as well as typically developing students if the dyslexia is caught in time and they receive the specialized intervention, but that neurobiological condition will remain because it is how their brains are wired. So now I'm going to turn this back over to Jenny and let her take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Locke. Yes, so how does iStation bolster that identification of children at risk for dyslexia and also support them? Well, it's all about screen and intervene. Our iStation's indicators of progress, or that ISIP, are those formative assessments that consist of a battery of subtests, and those subtests are grounded in that National Reading Panel's Big Five essential components. These assessments are going to measure in skills most predictive of reading success. The ISIP screening is important because we know, just as Dr. Locke has alluded to, is that any type of reading difficulty, the earlier we can identify it, the easier and more effective it is to provide those interventions. So iStation's dyslexic screening is brief. It takes 4 to 5 minutes for a student to complete a skill area. And it can be done as part of other screening measures or procedures. So we have a lot of districts that not only use this as their dyslexic screening, but also use iStation for their universal screening for their RTI MTSS process. And it can be administered by the classroom teacher. So no need to go out and get testing coordinators to test students. iStation has been working with many districts and state level dyslexia screening initiatives to help schools identify students at risk. But it is important to note that the ISIP assessments are used to screen students, not diagnose or identify dyslexia, but rather help identify who may be showing those characteristics of dyslexia so that teachers can then intervene in those key areas to determine if they are going to respond to intervention. And if a student is not responding to intervention, the personalized data profiles that they get with iStation will help educators decide if a full dyslexia evaluation is needed. With iStation, you also have adaptive curriculum that is going to provide students with unique instructional pathways, and it places students in this instruction based on those assessment results. It's adaptable, and that adaptability is going to give students reteach lessons. It's going to give them support on skill deficiencies as they work through lesson cycles. This individualized instruction is going to give explicit and direct instruction, which is what we know these students need. And it's also going to provide teachers with insight on what skills students are needing support on for those targeted interventions. Now, along with the ISIP, we also have some great data collection for screening on those characteristics of dyslexia through our Rapid Automatized Naming Assessment, or RAN. And like Dr. Locke alluded to, this is an important piece of the puzzle when looking at students at risk. That difficulty of rapidly automatically naming a series of objects or numbers or letters shows that the reading difficulties are not just a difficulty with that phonological process, but rather processing speed. And so kinder through third grade students are going to make recordings of themselves naming these familiar symbols as quickly as they can without making mistakes. And then the assessment is nationally normed, so it gives teachers that additional indicator on identifying students who are at risk. We also have iStation's oral reading fluency assessment. This is another cutting edge assessment that uses voice recognition technology to automatically measure their oral reading fluency for elementary students. Again, students will make recordings of themselves reading grade level passages, which then pass through calibrated acoustic models in order to produce auto scores. And so teachers can then make immediate decisions based on this data, those color-coded reports that are based on the Hasbrook and Tyndall National 2017 national norms. Now, oral reading fluency and the RAN, so the ORF and the Rapid Automatized Naming Assessments, really allows teachers to see, it can be thought of as that check engine light on your car, right? It really indicates a problem so that then teachers can then start to figure out, okay, well, where is these hiccups coming from? So I want to go ahead and post another poll for you. What do teachers at your district, or if you're a classroom teacher yourself, what do you struggle with the most when planning and delivering interventions? So there are a couple of options there on the poll, but if there's something else that you're like, hey, this is really my biggest issue, then you can just put it in the chat and we'll give you about 30 seconds to complete the poll. All right, so time is up. Let's go ahead and see. Yes, time definitely being up there and knowing what skills to address. Absolutely. It's like, okay, I know maybe who my students are that I need to intervene with, but what are we going to work on with them? Yes, absolutely. Some finding those differentiated materials. Yes, needing additional support staff. Having a few more hands in the classroom definitely could be invited in. All right, great. Thank you for sharing. We're going to go ahead and close out the poll. All right, so iStation can also be used as that intervention tool. In addition to our adaptive curriculum, we do have reports and resources that are going to give teachers that real-time data to know exactly what skills to work on. It's also going to provide some of those differentiated lessons to use for support. So what you're looking at on the screen now is a quick snapshot of what we call the reading risk report. And it provides teachers with risk indicators and risk ratings of students who are showing in those key areas that represent characteristics of dyslexia for each specific grade level. So students with multiple risk indicators are going to face a higher risk of having those reading difficulties. iStation also provides reports that are going to group students by need. So teachers can identify children who may need more help with, let's say, phonemic awareness, for example. And this report's not only going to group students by need, but it's also going to provide teachers with some printable teacher-directed lessons to give the next step. Many of these foundational skills will take that multi-sensory learning approach to enhance memory and just that ability to learn. So this is an example of using those mnemonic letter cards and having students create the letter Q with a variety of different materials. The beauty of these lessons is that they are fully scripted. So it really just gives you word for word how to deliver these lessons. And so it gives teachers that ability to use with ease, and no matter what that experience level is of the teacher. So if they do have those extra supports in the classroom, that can work with a small group, it's mapped out for you and fully scripted. We also have skill growth reports that are great to use for that progress monitoring piece. Are we responding to intervention? And so what you're looking at on this report is all those little yellow circles are going to represent an ISEP result in those key subtested areas when looking at characteristics of dyslexia. Just like Dr. Locke alluded to in those kindergarten, first grade, we're really focusing on that phonemic awareness subtest as being one of those signs. So this is just where you can see those yellow data points on where that student is assessing in. And what we can do is then marry the teacher's documented intervention sessions with those reports. So where you see those red lines are when a teacher went in and worked with a student, on some intervention support. And so, when you can marry those interventions with this report, you can really see, are my interventions working? Are they having an effect? If you start to see those data points really continuing to decrease, then it's going to give you that guidance to make those educational decisions. Do we need to increase the intensity of our interventions or the frequency of how often we're intervening? Or again, if further evaluation of dyslexia is then recommended. So if you are ready to try iStation, or you are wanting to learn more about us, we are here to help. You can visit us at info.istation.com/contact us. So we'll go ahead and put that link in the chat box for you. Our account exec team will reach out to you, answer any additional questions that you may need, some clarity. Go ahead and get iStation going for your students and your teachers, but also providing some professional development so that we can continue to help your teachers look for those key characteristics of dyslexia, and then again, how to use those reports and resources to help deliver those next steps. And then you can find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have a YouTube channel as well. We love to hear from our educators on, how iStation is being implemented, how it's working with their students. So you can visit us on those social media networks and really communicate and have that collaboration with other educators in districts that utilize iStation as well. Great. So I think we're going to open it up to questions.
Oh, right. Perfect. So yeah, now we've come to the audience Q&A portion of our webinar today, and where you can send in your questions. And so Dr. Locke and Jenny can answer your questions live on the air. If you haven't already, you can send in your questions in writing, and you can do that just by accessing the Q&A panel that we have right there. It's on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. It's the option next to the chat button. And if you can't see it, there should be 3 dots next to the chat button. Click on that, and that should bring you to the Q&A panel. All right, so this first one that came in seems like it was in response to one of the slides where you were discussing the myth or truth questions about dyslexia requiring specialized instruction. So the question is that a sometimes or always type of response that dyslexia requires specialized instruction?
So it's hard to know exactly when the question popped in. But what the research is showing is that students at risk of dyslexia respond really well to the multisensory types of intervention, where there's a lot of focus on, drawing the letters, cutting them out, having shapes that they can feel, utilizing all of their senses to associate the letters and the sounds. And that is the type of intervention that works best with students at risk of dyslexia. So there are, other methods, as well, do all dyslexic, students at risk of dyslexia, do they all respond to it? Probably not. There's always going to be some of those special cases, but the research shows that that's some of the ones that they respond best to. I hope that answers the question. We also had a question come through about what if a student cannot read at grade level, and I saw this question pop up while Jenny was talking about our oral reading fluency. And the way the oral reading fluency is structured is that the reading levels are, on grade level, but it gives the words correct per minute. And so you can monitor students' progress over time if they're struggling to read on grade level passages. And again, some of the research shows that constant practice in oral reading fluency, even just a few minutes a day, will help students, increase their skills in that area.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's see some other questions that just came in directly to me. What are some strategies, that educators can use to help identify dyslexia in English learners? I'm guessing that might be English language learners. I guess you can answer for both of them.
Yes, and so that can be difficult because sometimes you don't know if they're struggling because of dyslexia or because they're struggling with learning another language, and so those get confounded a bit. We also have a Spanish literacy assessment called the ISIP Lectura, and that assesses the literacy skills in Spanish. And so if the student is an English learner whose home language is Spanish, well, we have a very similar assessment there. It is not a translation of the English assessments, rather it's authentic and it's written around how students learn how to read in Spanish. So it has a different theoretical construct, but it also has, some phonemic awareness and type activities there as well in that assessment.
Perfect. And this next question just came in. It's pretty important. So this person who submitted their question, they're saying that a lot of the markers or signs that you've been describing today, there are some of the same challenges that they're seeing in students with learning disabilities and sometimes attentional issues. And so the question is, how do you definitively pinpoint that the challenges are dyslexia specifically?
So there is a common comorbidity between attention deficit and dyslexia. A lot of times students will have both. And sometimes the students with just attention deficit, but they don't have dyslexia, can also struggle. So I understand the question. So what the ISIP is intended to do is to it's a screener and to identify some of those red flags, but it does not, officially diagnose. That will have to be done, according to your state dyslexia handbook, if your state has one. But most states, spell out how a student should be diagnosed with dyslexia. Typically, if you identify some of the red flags on the ISIP and you're working with the student, providing in the intervention, and if they're not responding and they're continuing to struggle, then those students might be referred to a school psychologist or an educational diagnostician for further evaluation. Usually there's a group of professionals that make the determination on dyslexia rather than relying on one screener.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's see another question. What indicators are prominent in students with an IEP?
So that's hard to answer because it really depends on what the IEP is for.
Well,
So unless I have some more specific information, that would be hard. But again, it would be the lack of response to intervention. And again, that's where you might have to get your team together to figure out what's going on with that student.
okay, perfect. So Rael, if you would like a follow-up, please send in a follow-up question so I can ask it to Dr. Locke. Let's see, another one that came in that we can get to in that time. How common is dyslexia?
So that depends. The literature will show different prevalency rates. In English, it's typically around 10 to 15%. Those are the prevalency rates I see most often. Usually the prevalency rates are lower in students who, like over in Spain or Italy, where the language is more phonetic. It's a more what we call a transparent language. And so sometimes the literature will show a 5% prevalency rate in some of those languages.
Perfect. Let's see here. So is there a comparison that could be shared from iStation on how they feel they are a tier above other diagnostic programs? So like, and yeah, do you think you could do that?
Sure. I don't think we have a
Well, so they
I
did
don't
give
think we have
some
a slide. I
examples.
don't think we have a slide for that, but I can speak to it if that helps answer the questions. So we are an early literacy assessment. We do assess for some of the specific skills. We also have a RAN assessment, which not all dyslexia screeners have a RAN assessment, so that adds in another piece of the puzzle. We also have the oral reading fluency subtest, which also allows teachers to be able to listen to the children reading, and it also gives an automated score on words correct per minute, which again is another red flag. So those are some of the services we provide. And then also, I think what makes iStation unique and different is that we also, have some of the what's next within our reading curriculum. And so I'll let Jenny talk to that a little bit.
Yes, so we do provide teachers with the what's next step. We do not only group students by need, but we'll tell you what skill deficiencies they're showing up with. And then we also have those printable resources that you can use for that face-to-face intervention support. And then also within our ISIP, within that early literacy assessment, the subtests are going to be adaptable. So if students are in second or third grade and they are showing a need on their ISIP results, they will start to gate down into some of those foundational subtests. So you could very well see your third grader taking a phonemic awareness or even a letter knowledge subtest, so that we can really screen to figure out, okay, where are these skill deficiencies coming from, and which foundational skills can we start with as far as building that student and see if they're going to respond to intervention. So I think that having that adaptability of the subtests without teachers having to go in and assign different things, it is just going to be automatically given as students take that monthly assessment is a one of our, I guess, key features on being able to really see where those foundational skills are coming from.
Perfect. And we do have a follow-up question to that. So do they, I'm guessing iStation, does iStation intend on applying for the approved assessment screeners in Ohio to meet the new dyslexia law requirements?
Yes, we are an approved dyslexia screener in Ohio. We just got approved last summer. We have also been working with them to apply again, where we've had the research that we submitted needs some updating. And so we will be submitting again, but we are an approved screener in Ohio. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect. Yeah, and if not, yeah, please feel free to submit a follow-up question and I'll make sure to ask it. That said, we still have plenty of time. I know we have a few questions that are still coming in, but if there are any questions that still haven't been answered that you'd like either Dr. Locker or Jenny to address, please feel free to continue submitting them into the Q&A. So this question just came up. How much time do students normally spend on iStation?
So we do have some recommended usage times based on research where we've seen students make the greatest gains. And it really depends on how they're performing on that assessment as far as those usage criteria. Anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes, we say that's kind of that sweet spot of having students use the adaptive curriculum during the week. And so getting those 30 to 40 minutes are going to give them what they need when they need it, because again, they're dropping into that instructional component based on that assessment performance. So they're able to work on lessons and skills that are at their level. And then while they're working in the adaptive curriculum, that piece is also adaptive. So they'll get reteach lessons if they are seeing a need. And then the teacher gets flagged. Hey, you had a student that struggled with the SH blend. And here is a teacher directed lesson that you can print out and use for filling in the gaps and the skill deficiencies for those kiddos.
Perfect. And it looks like, so this next question that came in, so this person, they're looking to provide instructional strategies for K through 5 ELA teachers once red flags come up in the beginning of the year screener. So here's the question. Do you have, a book, academic article, or website suggestion that includes such strategies? I'm guessing maybe that could be a follow-up question too, if the team at iStation would like to share that afterwards.
Sure, we can share some of that information later.
Perfect. All right, let's see. Another question. How does iStation support as a dyslexia screener differ from being a universal screener?
Yeah, so we do have many districts that are using ISIP kind of twofold. They're using it as their universal screener as well as a dyslexia screener. And one of the big differences is really when you're looking at those characteristics of dyslexia, it's not necessarily their overall reading scores that you're using to determine those students who are showing at risk. It's really looking at those key skilled areas, just like, Dr. Locke talked a lot about, what are those signs in kindergarten and first grade, looking at phonemic awareness and letter knowledge. Because when we looked at that classic pattern of that kindergarten student who really was flying under the radar when you look at that universal screener, that RTI process, because that student was an overall in those green shaded areas, right? So that student was in a level 3 or even a level 4 student because their vocabulary and their listening comprehension was increasing that overall score. But where those key indicators for dyslexia came in at was they were performing low in phonemic awareness and letter knowledge. And so when you are using ISIP for a dyslexia screener, you're looking at specific skills and subtests by grade level versus just using their overall scores.
All right, perfect. So those are all of the questions that I have fielded in so far. That said, as I go through my closing slides in just a few moments, please feel free, to continue submitting your questions if any come to mind, and I'll make sure that they're sent over to iStation so they can be answered at some point in the future. And that question will include the one about the academic papers, etc. So I'll make sure to send that to you, Dr. Locke and Jenny. But first off, before I go through those closing slides, I just want to thank you again to you, Dr. Locke and Jenny, for your time here today. And of course, thank you to iStation. And I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for joining us here today as well. You know, for those of you who enjoyed our presentation today, you'll be pleased to know there are many more upcoming web seminars like this one that are provided by us at District Administration, which is the leader in editorial coverage of news, trends, and current issues in K through 12. We have a wide range of readers who subscribe for free to DA, and they stay up to date with us in our print magazine, online, in our newsletters, and web seminars like this one. Also, if you would like to watch this web seminar again, or for those of you who believe that, you know, what you saw here today would be particularly helpful to your colleagues, and I'm sure that would be the case, you'll be pleased to know that our team at DA will be sending you an email at some point tomorrow, and in that email, it will include an on-demand recording of this web seminar and the link to the slides. So with that, on behalf of DA, this is Stephen Blackburn. Thanks, everyone. Take care, be well, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.
Happy holidays.